Well, welcome everyone to the Response Workshop as part of developing version 2 of the Robotics Roadmap for Australia. My name is Sue Kay and I'm the Research Director for Cyber-Physical Systems with CSIRO's Data 61 and was involved in putting the first version of the roadmap together. So today, before we get into the workshop, I would first like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we are all meeting today, the various lands on which we are all meeting today, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. So this was the original roadmap that was released in mid-2018, and it was a first attempt to look at what the capability in robotics was in Australia and to really define what the robotics industry in Australia looked like and the different ways that robotics would have an impact on every sector of the Australian economy. So we came up with a number of recommendations. I think there were 18 in total, and we could broadly group those into 5 different categories of recommendations. Recommendations for industry, the education and research sectors, government, but also some recommendations around the culture that we would need in Australia to really promote the use of robotics more. And so you can see there that supporting an entrepreneurial culture around our niche capability and really harnessing the nation's imagination through aspirational challenges that help solve Australian challenges was recognised as an important area that robotics and the robotics industry really needs to address in this country. Which leads us to this workshop. In the original roadmap, we didn't have a chapter around response. And I think some of the feedback that we got and the reason that we're having this workshop today was that people really felt that we needed to have such a workshop. One of the great things about putting the original roadmap together was it really unearthed some of the fantastic success stories of robotics in Australia and some of the great influence that robotics has had in various parts of the economy and even towards protecting the environment. And as part of that, we did a lot of mapping of the capability in Australia. So we are aware that there are some great companies here in Australia doing really interesting work across all parts of the continent. I think the question probably on everyone's lips, though, is that if we have this great capability and we're doing some really interesting things, then we are obviously inhabiting a continent that has a lot of challenges. We have a small population, a gigantic land mass, and we are faced with very extreme environmental conditions and climatic conditions at times. We're a land of droughts and floods. And I guess when we see images like this and experience these events in Australia, floods, fires, the most recent pandemic crisis that we are going through, the question on many people's lips, particularly for people in the robotics community, is, well, where are the robots? We've been developing some great technology. When is it going to be time that we can apply robotics to help us to address these major challenges that we are facing? And that's the purpose of today's workshop. And there is some great examples. This is a local company in Brisbane called BIA5 who have developed a firefighting robot that you can see being tested out here at the moment. It seems that a lot of the components that we need to deploy robots to help us when we're facing these grand challenges are almost there. What are the next steps that are going to help us take it that bit further so that the next time we have a major challenge in Australia, you will see robots like this on the front line being deployed to good effect. And we have we have some great capability. So from CSIRO's Data 61, we have a team that has been competing in the DARPA Subterranean Challenge, which involves putting teams of robots together to explore an underground environment. And you can imagine this would be a great scenario in a search and rescue situation where you have an unknown situation underground. You don't want to send people into a potentially hazardous situation, so you really need to be able to send robots down. And that's the challenge that this is addressing. So in the last challenge, we sent down one of BIA5's robots. You can see there the orange robot carrying a drone from another local company, Emerson, equipped with CSIRO Data 61 technology. And here is the robot just about to move into the underground environment. You can see the robot is carrying the drone. It is actually mapping as it's going along in the environment. In a moment, you'll see the drone actually launching from the back of the robot and helping to explore, because this is a three-dimensional space with actually quite a lot of vertical areas that can't be explored by a ground robot alone. So there goes the drone out exploring the environment. And from that, we've been able to develop some fantastic mapping technologies that really can take you into that environment. And you can see the robots autonomously collecting this information, actually sharing all of this information with the other robots on the course and being used to identify particular artifacts. So gaining situational awareness in the event that you might need to send people down into that environment. So I'm trying to paint a picture that we've got a lot of the key ingredients. What do we need to do to bring them together to solve a lot of the challenges that we might face in the future? The second version of the robotics roadmap is being put together so that we can keep some of the momentum going from the first roadmap, which helped to raise awareness of a lot of the robotics work happening in Australia today. It's also to help encourage the development of the right skills that we need to support the industry, to identify where Australia can make a difference, and I believe that there are a number of areas where we can do that, to help unearth capability. So we feel that in the first roadmap, we were really only scratching the surface of some of the amazing companies that are out there doing great work in robotics in this country. And ultimately, we want to establish a clearly recognised robotics industry in Australia. And as we've had to move all of these workshops online, we're sensitive that you might not necessarily get as much opportunity to contribute to the roadmap as you would like. And so we have set up a survey that you can see the link to there on the screen that we would encourage you to fill out so that you can provide content that you think is relevant for the roadmap. I'll also post that into the webcast for you to view. So today I'm going to be handing over in a minute to Elliot Duff from CSIRO's Data 61 to talk about bushfire response. And then we'll be hearing from David Kavanagh in Manchester. And then we're going to move into a more interactive session where you'll have the opportunity to contribute some of your ideas through an online process using a Miro board. So you'll be given some instructions on that. Don't be too worried. It's fairly intuitive. So I'd like to thank my co-chairs for this session, Ian Manchester, Elliot Duff, Catherine Forcina, Mary McGeoch, and David Kavanagh for putting this workshop together today. And I will now hand over to Elliot Duff to talk about the bushfire response. Thank you.
Right, thanks, Sue. Right, okay, I'll share my presentation here. Okay. So, good morning to everyone. So the is a bit confused. The word response robotics is sort of a new term that's coming around. A lot of people used to call it rescue robots. So you'll see these words used interchangeably, but it's a little bit dangerous. So I'll explain why that's important. But what I'm looking at is the situation here in Australia, what capabilities we have, and looking at some of the challenges that we have in Australia around the bushfire use case. So over the last couple of years, there's been a significant amount of activity in this space in terms of reports. So out of the UK, there's the UK Robotics and Autonomous Systems Network, who have written a report on extreme environmental robotics and robotics for emergency response. NIST, which is the American National Institute for Standards and Technology, have websites on this. They also have testing regimes. And the Japanese are very interested in rescue robots for particular earthquakes and other situations. So these are some of the materials that you could use to understand what the state of the art is. Websites on this have testing regimes, and the Japanese are very. I'm getting an echo here. I'll just stop that. Situations. So these are some of the materials that you could use to. I have to shut that down. Sorry. Okay. So this is some of the robots that we have in Australia. So Sue was mentioning BIA5 and Emerson with the hover map, but we have Australian Droid and Robot, the Little Ripper that deploys rescue for surfers. There's Emily, which is a sort of another ocean rescue. Nexus Magneto, which is confined space, Molten Labs and Swoop. I'm sure there are probably some other hidden gems out there, but that's probably one of the challenges that we face in Australia around finding the companies that can do this type of work. To also assist here, there's a number of robotic challenges. The one most relevant here was about 2015, the DARPA Robotics Challenge, which was designed to effectively solve a sort of Fukushima type disaster where robots go in and turn valves and climb stairs and open doors and so forth. That turned out not to be that successful, but it has led to some new technologies that would probably be a lot more suitable. The Europeans have a European Robotics League in the emergency robots that was done back in 2017. And Sue was talking about the DARPA Subterranean Challenge. And so this is the situation of going in and looking for people and other assets in underground environments or GPS denied environments, either buildings or caves. I won't show you the video because Sue showed you some of the video there. I won't go through all of it. So what sort of rescue robots do we have in the media? So about 10 years ago, there was a robot deployed, an Australian robot deployed out to a New Zealand mine. That didn't work. It broke down in some water, and there were some trapped miners, and the robot didn't work. 2020, 10 years on, a robot was deployed, a drone was deployed to investigate the situation in a mine down in Tasmania. Unfortunately, the people had perished, but the robot did mean that people didn't have to expose themselves to that danger. So this is sort of explaining why the language around the robotics or the response robotics ecosystem. And so let's look at bushfires in particular. So let's look at a scenario of a spot bushfire and how robots could address this. So what we're looking at is this is happening during the event. And if we look at the scale of the event and the number of robots that we need to deploy, we're looking at a region of about 100 meters, and we're looking at 1 to 10 robots. And what we define this is rescue or relief robotics. So the robot is there to either rescue the person or to monitor what's going on or monitor the situation. And the response at the top here is rapid. It needs to be rapid, and it's ephemeral. In other words, it goes in, does its job, and then it's finished the job. And then we look at scaling up. So we're looking at, say, localized bushfires, regional bushfire around the kilometre, where we're looking at, say, 10 to 100 robots. And then we're looking at national, sort of statewide bushfires, where we're looking at hundreds of kilometres being impacted and potentially 100 to 10,000 robots being used. This is sort of scenarios. So we're looking at this vertical in terms of what's happening during the event. And the challenge that we face here is that these robots have to be in storage, ready for being deployed at a moment's notice, and then they're often doing their work and then they have to come back. And this has been found to not be a very practical solution. So what we can look at is the role of robotics before the event. So we're looking at the time horizon here. So before the event, what we can have is robots that monitor and manage the ecosystem, such as fuel load. So these robots are long-term persistent response to the event. So they're preventative. And then after the event is around rehabilitation. And in this situation, we have dynamic persistent response. So before the event, we can understand what the robot needs to do. So it's sort of long-term planning. We understand what's going on. After the event, the robots have to deal with a dynamic changing environment because the environment has changed because of the disaster. So I think this is how we should be thinking about, rather than using the word rescue, because that just defines that middle column, we need to look at the whole response as before, during, and after. the event. And they may or may not be the same robots, but that's how we should be thinking about this scenario. And of course, we can change the event here. So in this case, the event is a bushfire, which is the topic of this presentation. But that could be a cyclone or an earthquake or a flood, and in which case the robots are monitoring and managing the built infrastructure rather than the forest. And after the event, they're actually rebuilding or demolishing the buildings safely. So this is how we're thinking about it. So this changes the requirements for robots. So traditional 3Ds of robots have been dull, dirty, and dangerous. But now for response robots, we need 3 extra Ds, which is demanding, distant, and distributed. And distributed is probably the most important here. It allows for an agile and scalable deployment of robots. And the requirements of that is that it has to operate in unstructured dynamic environments without supporting infrastructure, because the infrastructure may be destroyed in the disaster. And the robots need to be reconfigurable, redeployable, resilient, or redundant. So these are new characteristics, unique characteristics to response robotics. So this requires a change of thinking. And just recently, the Bushfire Royal Commission allowed drones to be used for bushfires. And this is what was presented in the ABC News of an emergency responder controlling a drone. And so where the robot is just remotely controlled machine. And this is wrong thinking, because what we really want to do is have a person safely in a remote control center controlling that drone. And we want an autonomous pilot is actually flying that drone. Okay, and so in this future scenario, the autonomous pilot could be anywhere. It could be in the drone, it could be in the mission control, or somewhere else. And this is where we need to start thinking about the way that we think about robots as not something that we control with a remote control, but they control themselves and we act in the mission control situation. So here's a scenario that we're looking at currently, very similar to the DARPA challenge scenario, but instead of exploring caves or underground environments, we're exploring a canopy, a forest. And so we have a robot on the ground, a drone, we have infrastructure, and we have a mission control system. And what we're looking at here is this technology has multiple dual use. So it can monitor and manage the ecosystem by improving the resilience and the rehabilitation, looking at fuel load and biodiversity assessment of the forest. And this is sort of an example of that technology being used by one of our partners. So Hovermap, Emerson, Hovermap. So this drone here is flying autonomously through a forest. It's avoiding all the trees, it's path planning, it's doing its thing. And this is the type of map that you get out of that technology. So you can see that this is going to give you sufficient information to understand both the fuel loads that are present, but also to perhaps in the future we're looking at managing the biodiversity of this environment. Okay, so there we go. And so I think I'm running out of time. So the conclusion is here. The lessons learned, there's an interesting report from the conversation around emergency robots around COVID. And that is that robots should be helping workers or the emergency responders, not replacing them. So it's a collaborative system. And that we need to use off-the-shelf systems rather than things that are being custom built and then put in a cupboard. So the stockpiling, it just doesn't work. That's what happened in Fukushima. They had robots to work, but when the disaster happened and they turned them on, you have flat batteries, people don't know how to operate them, you get code rot. There's all these scenarios where these robots aren't ready to be used. And the reality, of course, is you can't build a robot for every event. So we can think of all the disasters that can happen. We can't build a robot for every one of those disasters. We have to think differently about this. And also we need to create a community of capability. And that's the importance of having different human capability as well as robotics. So this is the motivation for the Australian Robotics Network, which is the host for the Robotics Roadmap. So reiterating, robots need to be redeployable, reconfigurable, resilient, and redundant. And the example of that I've got over on the right-hand side there is a robot that was built called Numbat at QCAT back in 1990. So this is an emergency responder robot to go into a mine with explosion proof. It was pressurized with nitrogen, had 30 kilometers of optical fiber. It was, once it was built, it was then decommissioned because no one was willing to fund it to keep it in reserve for an emergency. So the economics of this just doesn't make sense. We need to change the paradigm. And I think what's really important at the end, the conclusion here, is that people need to understand that robots can actually do things differently to how humans do it. So we need to think outside the box in the way that they respond to an emergency. And an interesting idea is that can robots volunteer for service? In other words, we have currently a volunteer firefighting service. Can we have a robotic volunteering fire service? Because in the future, 10, 20 years into the future, we're going to have autonomous cars on the road. We're going to have autonomous vehicles in farms, agriculture, mining. Can any of those machines be redeployed and act as emergency firefighters? And that leads to our later discussion. I'll leave that to discussions later on. So I'm finished now. So I'm going to hand over to David, who's going to talk about COVID. So.
Thanks very much, Elliot. And a very nice segue indeed. I'll just share my screen here. So I'm speaking to pandemic as the case study for robotics, autonomous and intelligent systems. Covering COVID as the live example, the stages and key activities. What are the needs and opportunities for robotics, automation, intelligent systems? How does that play into the smart medicine of our future? And also link a little bit into the opportunity for Australia to develop and export our services and capabilities, and share a little on what we've learned. So my background is medicine and engineering, practical experience as a medic and in emergency services in energy companies, and then around the world, about 20 countries so far, helping teams work better, including in risk and HSE, and most recently coronavirus support, both at local government, state and national level, and small businesses also. So we've also provide a course in this, and we provide advice to chief scientists and health authorities here in WA, and we work to contribute to knowledge sharing globally also. So I'll just introduce this in the words of the World Health Organization back on March the 11th.
In the past 2 weeks, the number of cases of COVID-19 outside China has increased sevenfold. COVID-19 can be characterized as a pandemic.
So a key nature of the pandemic, the coronavirus, was its very rapid spread from China across Iran, Italy, and hence around the rest of the world.
In the days and weeks ahead, we expect to see the number of cases, the number of deaths, and the number of affected countries climb even higher.
So a key factor of this stage was the very large number of unknowns. We knew it was rapidly spreading from person to person, but many characteristics of the infection were yet to be determined. So this has since grown to create the biggest challenge we've seen globally since World War II, in the words of the UN Secretary General, humankind at stake. And one of the particular challenges is it requires coordinated response at a national, state, and local level. And this leads into the opportunity for automation and intelligent systems also. When we look at the situation globally, it's continued to worsen. The total case count is accelerating, not abating, unlike in Australia. And likewise, the total death count continues to climb dramatically. Even in first world countries like the US and Sweden, we see the projections as of yesterday, the projected count is now exceeding 200,000. And you can see to the right-hand side of the graphic continues to accelerate. And when healthcare facilities are overwhelmed, as in Italy. That leads to improvised facilities, very high morbidity and ultimately mortality, which includes amongst healthcare workers who are at high risk. When we look at the sequence of events in across the world and in Australia, you see in this plot we have the international responses in purple, the Australian responses in blue, in black, the state responses in blue, and the local government responses in green. From the period from the 17th of March, it was a period of very rapid change. And when I ran that city workshop just a few days later, the projections were quite severe in terms of what could happen in our community. But even at that time, I was able to use modelling to help show what would happen, what we expected to happen, and the effect that we could have by making the right choices and influencing the right behaviours. And in this case, as you've seen, this is Western Australia, but Australia is similar. We're able to diverge to the right away from the predicted curve and rapidly achieve, in fact, 0 cases in WA and elimination from the healthcare system here. And when we look at a global response comparison, Australia was one of the best responders in the world. Even some countries which started well, like Singapore, have suffered increased cases, and South America, as well as the US, are a real focus at the moment. And even countries like New Zealand, which had declared themselves free, only within the last couple of days now have cases back in the country. And we've seen resurgence in China also. So this is a strong challenge both to our healthcare system and to our economic livelihoods. And a key factor in responding well is the accelerated innovation, which is taking place in Australia and around the world, and remains a big opportunity for the future. So by responding to enable all in the community to be able to restrain or constrain their movements, we've seen great success relative to the rest of the world. And we can see this both in health and economic terms. So this matrix of health outcomes against economic outcomes, it looks like Australia has effectively controlled the virus and is responding rapidly, whereas other parts of the world are more in the middle of the plot here. So when I was 2 weeks after I gave that first workshop, I was able to say, when I stood there, we had 30,000 lives at risk in the state. And when I applied that to the community, the 100,000 people, more than 1,000 lives at risk, with projections showing would be overrun within a couple of weeks. But strong aligned action on that day by that community, by our state and by our nation have seen us respond very well. So we're now more like in a positive breakthrough rather than a constrained case or a case of being overrun. And this actually builds the appetite for innovation and engaging in this workshop today. So thank you to anyone from the City of Melbourne on the call today. And the key underpinning this was, well, what have we learned as we're progressing and what can we share? And by using the mathematical models that represent the network, we're able to understand that clearly. We're also able to systematically identify good practice measures and enable Australian communities and others to see where they are placed in being prepared for the worst case scenario, for example, which is where one class of robots have a key role, and where they're also in planning for return to normal, where robotics and automation can help us in both of those cases. We've supported that with planning and education, which is a key one. And this explains a little bit of the maths behind it as we go from a susceptible population to an exposed population to an infected or recovered population. By understanding the nature of the maths and the possibility for super spreader events, we're able to develop the right measures to respond, which enable both lives and livelihoods to be saved. And you can see this in terms of the graphical burst out, and as Ian will explain later, the maths underlying it are quite similar between bushfires and pandemics. We can build that into the right environment, just as Elliot showed the drone being flown from the operations centre. We practically use an operations centre like that, for understanding what the new information is telling us, looking forward, informed by the model, making the right adjustments to the model to respond accordingly. So we use this routinely, and we use it in a digital virtual environment, so we can have people, up to 20 people from anywhere in the world, in that place at the same time. So if we're supporting South America or regional, outback Western Australia, we can very quickly deploy these types of measures. So what have we learned? Certainly that informed, localized, near real-time epidemiological modeling to evaluate options, predict outcomes, communicate and influence behavior has been really effective, even at the community level, with a very quick turnaround. Things that would have taken months before we were doing within actually 3 days. And I was using that live in the workshop. And a key factor, of course, is culture and motivation, how to engage people and make this localized and personalized. And I think extending robotics in that way holds a great future too. We've been sharing this work, of course. This is a presentation of a series of epidemiologists. And on the left-hand side, you can see what was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, quoting this work. And making it practical in application. So in the plot here, we've shown the green arrow down is the reduction in infection, which is possible by the intelligent sensing of, for example, a mobile app. And there is great opportunity to extend beyond what we currently have to give us an effective digital collective immunity in the absence of a vaccine. But this plays, as Elliot nicely introduced, how should you be ready? How should you be investigating and recognizing these things early, and then being prepared to initiate, accelerate, to respond, and then to recover. And the terminology is different here, and we find the data is different across different areas as well, so opportunity there. So some key questions, many of which still remain. What's the nature of the virus? What's the severity of the disease? How's it transmitted? What's the burden on public health? And how do we inform, engage, and empower the public? And the latter point, particularly important until there's in the very early stages of treatment or vaccination. And there's significant opportunity for sensing systems here. And Elliot's shown some good examples. Other types of environmental sensing, biological sensing too. Pardon me. And an important thing we learned, of course, was the need for local availability of PPE and the sustained capacity for agile manufacturing to support us. And then we are yet to be, we're still to arrange a vaccination once that's available, but there's significant opportunity through automation and intelligent application systems to accelerate that too, as there is for the research. So big opportunities also when we look at in high clinical severity, significant exposure, more than 200 deaths in the healthcare system in the UK, for example. And we see strong opportunity for that to be reduced, that exposure to be reduced by 85% or more through some technologically supported systems of augmented reality and robotics. So many questions still remain, and the more effectively we can harness the digital firepower to gather this information and analyze it, the more quickly we'll have an enduring solution. So a key to success has been working together collaboratively around a plan, which exists both at the national level and state level. Still opportunities to improve, but that's definitely been a key factor, and the importance of monitoring for a second wave of the outbreak or development of resistance and effective communication. So plenty of monitoring, again, a call for systems. So if we look forward into this, now we're starting to see a rapid level of increase in interest in how robots can play into this ecosystem of health. On-body sensors offer a strong opportunity. Hundreds of thousands of people have smartphones or smartwatches or Fitbits, which in fact would inform quite a lot about their health and give some early warning. And the right combination of robotics to reduce the risk and enhance the productivity, working alongside the healthcare workers and the emergency responders. And I look forward to hearing from all of you the cases that you see. It certainly evolves from the understanding we have globally in aspects like smart city, with smart health, smart education, public safety, smart home, and an Internet of Things. All the items I've shown here in green are key both for smart city use generally, but particularly in the case of a pandemic response. And here I've shown a few cases which come to mind. The top left, Australian Innovation from Eric Peck and his team, where critical medical supplies are deployed in a range of environments around the world. In Australia, these could be used potentially for accelerating delivery of testing from country areas to labs for analysis. State-of-the-art telemedicine, and I've shown here some use cases where the folks there are wearing augmented reality glasses, which enables significant reduction of exposure to the possible infection from the patient in the order of 80% plus potentially, and extending their capability over distance. In the top right, we've got some robots which are being used for disinfecting, and on the lower right, we see one of the locally deployed robots here in WA, a cobot used in the hospital to move things around, and people are getting used to that now. So I see there's very significant opportunity here. One of our colleagues at Integrated Energy on the AI side is using graphical means to help train an AI system for identification of the COVID virus amongst many thousands of other cases online. And when we look at the needs for response and recovery, very distinctively, a very high number of players at the local, state and national level. And these are, and as we've seen, unfortunately, on several occasions, maintaining the situational awareness across all of those is a challenge. And definitely there's opportunity there, I believe, to enhance that from our work in other industries. I'll show you a little bit here of the environment that we use regularly for bringing this information together and making decisions. And this is the type of environment that Elliot was talking about, where if you're flying a drone or deploying a robot, this is the situational awareness, and this is where the algorithms are being developed that would shape the deployment of those sorts of measures. So in here, we bring together all of the contextual information that's needed, both at global, national, and state level, and then bring it down to the specifics of the people responsible for one particular city, for example, or taking this information and turning it into the next evolution of the model, which then enables the right decisions to be made. The other aspect is we're able to digitally join environments you can't join physically. So we just stepped across into a hospital where clinicians are supporting infectious patients or researching new aspects of treatment, which we can't physically co-locate, but we're able to digitally bring them together. And the person at the back here might be the one who's flying the drone or deploying the robot or enhancing the algorithm, or indeed developing the next iteration of the model. So that's an example of how that we're using today. So we've seen significant acceleration of innovation and plenty more to come. High-speed testing, new integrated operations models, new 3D printing, and rapid development of treatments were the first to just coming through, and use of CCTV, drones for surveillance, broadcasting, and other measures. And the ability to track and trace effectively and use localized data is a big opportunity which aligns with Australia's strengths. We've seen strong success in places like Taiwan, where they do have good integrated systems to support them. And we've seen accelerated national and state responses. 20 years of progress in 2 weeks was a case in point for industrial relations and some of the underpinning features we need for innovation. So as we look forward, some of our current work is with South America, with CSIRO and with Austrade, together with ourselves. We're part of a group of Australian companies who are looking to export services and capabilities, pardon me, to South America, where there's currently the biggest need. And I'm really pleased that we've been able to build this type of collaboration to support the global need. So conclusions from me: we've certainly achieved strong results across Australia, and progressive measures at local, state and federal measure have been a key to that. Modelling, mathematical understanding of the nature of the disease has certainly been a key for enabling the right choices and the right learning. And by extension, we can also plan what should you be ready for and what should your playbook be for response as we go forward. There's significant learning which we can share to other parts of the world, I believe. And our experience of the likes of the Ruby Princess and Tasmanian hospitals and others show the value of digital systems for pandemic response, for contact tracing, situational awareness, for example, through an integrated operations model. I believe this enables tremendous opportunity at a time of global need for Australian knowledge in robotics, automation, and intelligent systems in an integrated and remote operations model, which we can develop and deploy for COVID-19 and future pandemics. And certainly the collaboration enabled by the pandemic is a key for success. So I look forward to your input to the next stages. And thank you very much. So now handing over to Ian, I believe.
Okay, thank you, David. Now, I believe I've just shared my screen, so hopefully everybody can see that. Okay, so thank you everybody for your attention. My name is Ian Manchester. For those who don't know me, I'm co-director of the Sydney Institute for Robotics and Intelligent Systems and director of research at the Australian Centre for Field Robotics at the University of Sydney. So what I'm going to be doing is just trying to pull together a couple of these seemingly very disparate topics of bushfires and epidemics such as COVID. And this is through the concept of spreading processes. So it turns out that there are some very kind of prominent high-level analogies between the two, as David mentioned a few minutes ago. Okay, so what do we mean by spreading processes? So I think to begin with, we might try to think about if we've got coronavirus and we've got a bushfire. These are completely different things, and it would be a bit ridiculous to say that we could understand them or model them in the same way. If we wanted to understand a virus, we'd study cell biology, immunology, various other areas of medicine, maybe the physics of what happens when somebody sneezes, that kind of thing. And if we wanted to understand a bushfire, we'd need to understand ecology, we need to understand the physics and chemistry of combustion and convection, the Earth atmosphere, weather dynamics, all of those things. And that's very true. And there are certainly obviously very important research that goes on at those levels. But actually, it turns out that at a very high level, the kinds of models that are used actually to make operational decisions for both epidemics and bushfires are actually very similar, and they're based around this kind of spreading process concept. So to take a simple example, I'll walk you through what's referred to as the SIR model: susceptible, infected, and removed, or sometimes called recovered. And there's various different versions of this. There's refinements of this. There's variations of this. I think David showed the SEIR model, which is another version of this. But the basic idea is quite simple. You might have a network of nodes representing people or locations, and maybe there's some kind of infection that starts in node A. And over time, with some probability, this might spread to the neighboring nodes of A. And so, for example, it might spread from A to B. Now B becomes infected, and then there might be spread from B to D, and maybe from A to C with some probability. And over time, maybe A and B are removed from the network, hopefully because they're recovered, but possibly not. Either way, they're removed from the network. And then now maybe D is spreading to E. And so you have these essentially three different states a node could be in, and then you could have kind of proportions of a population that are in these various states and so on. These sorts of models originated back in the 1920s, actually, to understand the spread of epidemics. But they can actually also be used to understand the spread of bushfires. And as I was mentioning, I guess some of the operational models that are used in current practice for firefighting are of this nature. So in an epidemic, the network is really the social network. It's who is coming into contact with whom. And the cell states are these ones that are basically these disease states. So you're either susceptible, meaning you could be infected, you're currently infected, or you're removed from the process, hopefully because you've recovered. In a bushfire, the network structure is primarily geographic. So you might have cells representing individual geographic locations, and then the spread can happen either at a very fine scale to do with the propagation of the fire front itself, or perhaps on a broader scale to more distant cells due to embers being carried by the wind. And the cell states here are actually directly analogous. So the susceptible state is unburnt bushland or forest or grassland or what have you. The infected state is currently burning, and the removed or recovered state is basically an area that's completely burnt out and can no longer burn anymore, basically because the fuel is extinguished. And of course, you could have proportional levels within these states as well. So that's kind of the high level analogy. And let's look at some of, I guess, the problems associated with this understanding and controlling this sort of process. So what we want to do is, at one level, we might want to predict how the process is going to evolve. And so this is really about estimating those probabilities of spread from one node to its neighboring nodes. In epidemic modeling, this will be some function of the disease characteristics itself. How contagious is it? But also the nature of the social network. Who is meeting whom? How long do they spend together? And also things like hygiene practices. Are people washing their hands? So these are the factors that might go into those estimation of those spreading rates. Whereas in bushfires, we can have the same sort of probability of spread type model, but now it's going to be a function of things like the wind speed and direction in a particular location, the fuel load in an area, the moisture content in that fuel, and also the topography. So whether it's a sloping up or sloping down, that kind of thing. And in fact, there's been a lot of research in Australia at various universities and also at the CSIRO into constructing these sorts of models. They're based on a number of different underlying mechanisms, but in particular, the Aurora Australis model is based very closely on this kind of cell-to-cell mapping process. There's been a lot of work in building these models and also validating these models. So this is work from the University of Western Australia, actually comparing the actual historical extent of various fires with what these models would predict. And actually you can see there that there's perhaps not perfect alignment, but significant enough alignment between the outlines and the shaded areas that you could use this and it is used in operational circumstances for prediction. Okay, so modeling itself is quite challenging. You need to understand, people are trying right now to understand the nature of the COVID disease. And in bushfires, there's a lot of remote sensing and there's a lot of potential for robotics here for building up information about fuel load, moisture content, that kind of thing. Beyond the modeling of spreading rate, there's also what we could call sensing of the current cell state. So the problem here is that we can't necessarily sense or test everywhere simultaneously. So we need to decide where to focus our efforts. And this might be on detecting new outbreaks. So in epidemics, this might be testing of high-risk people, maybe people who've just arrived through an airport where you expect higher likelihood. In bushfires, you're trying to monitor the landscape for spot fires. And we see here some figures, images on the right. So recently in California, a US National Guard Reaper drone has been used for patrolling the area during their wildfires to locate spot fires. So that's kind of locate new outbreaks so that you can address them before they get out of control. A second type of monitoring you might want to do is where you know there is already an existing outbreak and you want to keep track of it. Basically figure out how far is it spreading. And in epidemics, this is the problem of contact tracing. You know somebody's got it, who have they spoken, who have they been around, who might they have infected. And in bushfires, this would be essentially tracking the fire perimeter. And there's been a lot of research over several years actually on use of UAVs for essentially tracing the perimeter of a fire. Okay, so supposing you can model the process and supposing you can sense the current state, what can you do about it? And this is, of course, response. So this is intervening in order to suppress the spread of this process. And this can take various forms. It could be preparatory before there is any outbreak, just how do you prepare the network itself? And so in epidemics, unfortunately, we don't have it yet for COVID, but this could be vaccination programs. In bushfires, the preparatory actions are things like fuel load management, so fuel reduction burns and so on. And in the upper right, you can see actually a small drone that is being used for essentially starting small fires for the process of fuel reduction burns. So this is research that's going on at the moment. After something has begun, you've got these kind of reactive response. And this is about stopping the spread or reducing the spreading rate. In epidemics, this would be things like travel bans, social distancing, various kinds of medical treatments. In bushfires, this might be things like cutting fire lines with a bulldozer or water bombing, either on the fire or on kind of areas where the fire might spread to suppress the spread. And what you want to be able to do is figure out, okay, where should I apply these resources? I've got limited resources. I can't water bomb the entire landscape. I need to know where to allocate this. And you might want to do this according to certain priorities. So in epidemics, you might want to protect particularly high-risk individuals. So, for example, elderly or immunocompromised individuals. In a bushfire, it might be populated or high economic value areas that you particularly need to protect. So you're going to have these kind of cell-dependent priorities. So I think what I'll turn to now is just some of the recent research we've been doing on this problem. How do you allocate resources in order to protect important assets or important nodes? I'll just kind of go through this fairly quickly because I'm mindful of time. But here we've got a very simple, I guess, simulated landscape. It's quite crudely drawn. You've got different types of forest or desert areas which would correspond to different spreading rates. And then there's a city in the middle which represents, I guess, the asset you want to protect. And we can show here, hopefully you can see this, a simulation of a fire starting in a particular location. And without any resources allocated, it spreads to the city and that causes a problem. We get burning in the city. So what we've been working on is, suppose you have some kind of map of the likelihood of a particular fire breaking out. This might be, you might have higher likelihood areas corresponding to areas near roads, or it might be based on weather reports of lightning in particular areas and so on. So you might have an understanding of where the likelihood of an outbreak is. And then you can use this in order to plan the resource allocation. So here what we've been able to do, and this takes just 1 second to compute on a laptop, it's basically a major computational breakthrough. We've planned essentially building these fire line barriers around the city node. This is allocating 136 edges out of 3,500 possibilities. If you think of all the possible ways you could do that allocation, it's 10 to the power of 248 possibilities, which is an astonishing number. If you had 2 billion computers running since the Big Bang, you would still only be able to check 10 to the 24 of these. So it's really, it's completely impossible just to check all possibilities. But if you use this allocation, we run the simulation again, then you get the same kind of initial spread, but the city itself is protected. So this might look kind of fairly obvious, you protect the city, but it turns out the likelihood or the knowledge you have about the current state has a very big effect. So here we've got two similar allocations side by side, or quite different allocations, but exactly the same scenario. In one case, you have very little knowledge of where the outbreak might start. So in that case, if you don't know where the outbreak might start, the optimal thing to do is to protect the city. On the other hand, on the case on the right-hand side, you know precisely the location of the current fire. And if you know precisely the fire location, the optimal thing to do is aggressively suppress that fire. And then there's also some resources allocated here, the kind of blue lines, to suppressing on the path that the fire would likely take towards the city. And you can try all sorts of variations between these and so on, and it will work out the optimal allocation of suppressant resources. So that's just one example. This is in kind of the resource allocation problem. But I think, broadly speaking, epidemics and bushfires, they both represent problems of suppressing some kind of damaging spreading process across a network. These tend to be huge scale networks, so we need methods that can scale and be distributed and work with limited data. And the associated kind of data computation problems include modeling, sensing, planning of interventions. I think there's two messages here. One is that robotic systems can play a role at many levels in terms of a robotic device, whether it's in the monitoring or the intervention, but also more broadly at kind of a holistic level, tools and concepts from robotic control, machine learning, and so on can be applied for managing this whole process and understanding the network and understanding the control of it. And I think that goes more towards, I guess, David's point about the role of mathematical modeling in control of epidemics. Okay, so that's what I had to present. So I think I will maybe pass back to Elliot or Sue at this stage.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Elliot here. One of the comments to be made about this is that the understanding that robots need information to make decisions, right? People in emergency responders have, gut feelings, have intuition of many years of history, but the importance of data and in the decision-making process about where you deploy robots and how they get used is critical in these scenarios. And of course, that information still can be used by the human emergency responders, but it's a lot more, there's a lot more formality in the robotics side of it. Sue, is there anything else you wanted to comment before we break into the Miro?
No, thanks, Elliot. I think it would be great to just get people unleashed. I think that we do have one question, though, that has come through, and that is one on does anyone work with the Australian Association for Unmanned Systems, AAUS?
So one of our researchers, Torsten Mertz, is a member of that, and we are associated with them, yes.
Does anyone, so that's from the CSIRO Data 61 perspective, any of the other co-chairs?
I think some of the colleagues in our UAV group are associated with that organization, but I can get back to you on that.
I think it's true that we are not actually, as part of the roadmap, I don't think we have any contributions, and it would be great if there is anyone who would like to volunteer from that group to help give us that perspective. We are limited by our networks, and we want to make sure that the roadmap is representative. So if you think there are areas that we need to actually have some input from groups like that, then please let us know and put us in touch. They really appreciate that. But Elliot, I think you're going to give everyone an idea of how to
so it's already working. Thank you from Andrew McConnell, who's also a member of the AAUS. So what we're seeing, you should be seeing now, is my Miro board. And what you're seeing is my view of it, but everybody now should be able to follow the link that was sent around firing up Miro. And I see we have probably 15 people on there now. And so what Miro board is a big, you can think of it as a huge whiteboard. And down the left-hand side on my screen, there's a number of frames. And those frames are going to be the different whiteboards that we're going to be working on. And how we use the whiteboard is that there's some content already on some of the whiteboards, but in this first welcoming one, which is just this orangey yellow color, is that people can the idea now is just to play around with Miro. So this is just the start. And what we would like people to do is just put some post-it notes on the screen to show that you know how to use it. So, for instance, in this case here, how to get a post-it or a sticky note. On the left-hand side, you should be able to see this ribbon, and this is the sticky note icon. So if I click on that, I can choose a sticky note, and hi, this is Elliot typing. And that's my note. And so what you can do is you can move this note around, change its size, and so forth. So people can start editing. I see there's 18, 19 people coming in. So if you can get onto this board. Now, what you should do is over on the bottom right-hand corner is the sort of navigation area. So what this can do is you can move around the board to different areas on the board. So if I go to the full screen, so I'll zoom out. So this is the entire board, the whole whiteboard, and it's got a number of different little panels, and people should be editing those panels. I see that we've got up in here on the top right-hand corner, you should be able to see the number of people that are coming on board. So these are all the people that I can see. And I can see some people adding some comment here about, did anybody catch up with ICRA planetary session? My case, no, I didn't. But if somebody else did, they can make a comment. What you can do here is when you edit one of the post-it notes, you can put an emoji on it. And on those emojis, you can vote on it. So if you did, you can add the emoji. And then you can, somebody else needs to vote on that. So if somebody else can click on that if they did attend, then we can sort of get a sort of straw poll of who's on there. So is anybody else typing away? I'll just leave it for a session. Is anybody else from the panel here, the co-chairs, want to make any other comments?
Elliot, for me, it's the editing tools are currently grayed out. Not sure if
on the left-hand side here.
On the left-hand side, yeah, the post-it notes and so on, and there's a message saying your team has reached the free plans limit. Only 3 most recently created boards could be editable.
Right. Okay. I'll go and see what I can do about that. Thank you. I'll unshare and come back. Hopefully, if people can just bear with me for a minute. I'm having some difficulty. Sorry, guys. Somebody else created some more boards in my space, and I don't know how to delete them. So I'll just
Perhaps if there's any other Q&A, we could.
Yeah, probably if people can type in the Q&A on the, and we'll go through that. Any other questions there people are having? We might have to finish. We might have to finish early because I cannot delete the boards. Hold on. I'll just give another few minutes.
Elliot, just Catherine here. I'm wondering whether perhaps instead of everyone contributing to the board, we're able to type into the Q&A and go through one board at a time, and either yourself or someone else who has editing abilities can be adding to the boards.
Yeah, I just, if somebody else can do that right now, because I know what's happened. Somebody just created a board in my space, and I like about 50 minutes ago, and I cannot delete it. So that's what's somebody is. I've been basically hacked.
Elliot, it says that the 3 most recently created boards could be editable. So one kind of ad hoc solution would just be to create another one, which would then be one of the most recently created ones. It won't be as nicely arranged as this one, but we could just use it.
What I need to do is delete the one that was just created. Somebody's just created one thing called Untitled, and it won't let me delete it. It was created by Angus Robinson, whoever that is, somebody out there. I don't know. Now. If anybody else knows how to use these more than I do, then it might be useful too. Is any Q&As coming up through on the system?
I've just opened up some dialogue with everybody to foster some responses. To all of our amazing and very patient participants. If you do have anything that is front of mind for you that you want us to be discussing today with respect to the incident response roadmap, this would be a great time to start voicing those things in the Q&A, and myself, Meredith, and other co-chairs that are around can start to funnel that into the board. Actually, it will need to be one of the people that does have access. I think Andrew McConnell, you have been a lucky person to get editing access. I think Ellie also has that, and then we may have one other that is able to change things on this board. at this point in time. So maybe we open up that dialogue.
All right, what I might do, I think what I can do is okay. Okay, so what I'll do, I'll go through the board and fix it so that people can edit later today if they can. That's the only way I can do this. I cannot work out how to delete the board that was created. So what I'll do is I'll go in and I'll show you what the process is that we're hoping to go through. Okay, so here's the intention here is, I'll show you. So what we have is the first workshop. So here's the workshop. We have 4 tasks: importance difficulty matrix, a SWOT TOES analysis, a technology roadmap, and a pest analysis. And so in the importance matrix is basically what's important and what's difficult. So I've just put in the case there of robots fighting a bushfire. You know, that's something, actually physically fighting a bushfire. That's very hard, very difficult, but it's something that we probably need in the next 30, 40 years, something we could do. The next analysis is a SWOT TOES analysis. And so what we're looking at is the opportunities and threats that we have in Australia, as long as our strengths and weaknesses. And I've just put in some examples there that in our case, Australia has been one of the first G20 nations to experience the impact of climate change. So, you know, the bushfires that we experienced last summer are basically something that that we are experiencing as a result of climate change or changes in our climate. And the opportunity here is for us to, because we have to solve these problems, we will become world leaders in addressing these problems. And our strength here is that we have a strong high-tech mining and ag sector, which in theory could deliver some of the solutions into that space. It's incorrectly typed there, but it's a poor venture capital investment in Australia. That's one of the challenges we face. The next analysis would be the technology roadmap. So what we're looking at in the next 5 years is to fully identify the identification of spot fires, and in 15 years would be the fully automated extinction of those, or dealing with those spot fires. And then the final analysis is the pest analysis, which is looking at political, economic, technology, and social factors. And for an example of the social factor, one of the challenges that we face is that if we want autonomous pilots, for example, if we want AI to be controlling autonomous aircraft, then we have to change the legislation to accept the personhood or others of artificial intelligence. In other words, the legislation has to know how to deal with the words autonomous pilot. At the moment, the legislation is built around the concept of a remote pilot. What we need to do is change that to the idea of a personhood of AI. So. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll leave it there. So is there any other comments, any other any other questions or from the podcast? I see there's some questions here. So from Simon Dawson, there's a question: do you think bushfires and pandemics have accelerated thinking and adoption of this? And well, the answer is yes, absolutely. So the comment there is that basically what's happened is we've understood the importance of agility, particularly agility in the manufacturing sector. And so that agility is required to deal with a lot of these pandemics and bushfires. And I think agility rather than lean is really where we're going to be focusing a lot of our efforts.
Yeah, resilience is a term that comes to mind on that also too. Yeah. I think across a range of sectors, resilience across our supply chain, resilience in our health system, definitely a theme for the future.
Elliot, there's also a question about the process going forward with developing the roadmap and timings. And at the moment, the idea is that we will try and have drafts of all of the chapters together by September with a view to releasing the roadmap either late 2020 or early 2021.
Yeah.
And apart from these Miro boards, which will remain open after this event, there was also a survey link that was sent around in the chat and that you can also see on the Robotics Australia Network homepage. So if you would like to contribute at any time, then please just use that as a way to do it. And that's also a good opportunity where you can dob in an Australian robotics company. We would love to get some more case studies to include in the roadmap to showcase some of the great work that's being done here.
So what I've just done is copied the whole Response Robotics Miro board, and so I've put the link on the webcast so people can see. People should be able to see other chats. Is anybody else able to see the webcast, the link on the webcast?
Yes, Elliot, it is there.
Right. Should everybody be able to see those chats?
No, only if you are actually on the webcast.
Oh yeah. So I've put it on the webcast. So is people are able to see everybody's chat? That's all.
It does appear that the new link you've given, I've now got editing access to, so it looks like it's worked.
Thank you. Right.
So we're back in business, huh?
Back in business. So, okay. So there's a new board. There's a link to the new board on the webcast chat there. So if people can use that link now rather than the old link, and I will load that board. Okay, so we're looking at the importance difficulty matrix first. So rescue, somebody's put in rescue in post-flood disaster situations. Okay, I see some people are coming in, which is great to see. So I can see, and I can see, if you see my screen, you can see where other people are floating around on the, excellent. Oh, good. More people are joining. Excellent. So there's a comment from David Johnson around regulatory issues, and yes, they do appear to come up all the time. To some extent, we've been beating up CASA, about robotics and automation, but I think the challenge that we face is that we don't have the legal framework to deal with AI yet, and therefore, that's been it's all very well saying, well, we're going to have some regulations that deal with robots, but what we haven't defined is what's the roles and responsibility of robotic systems. So when we have a robot that is, or an AI that is controlling a drone, what is its rights, what's its roles and responsibilities, and who's going to get sued if something goes wrong? And one of the opportunities is to create personhood for AI. In other words, just in the same sense that a company is a person in Australian law and American law, that it has a board and the board is responsible for that person. And so what we could do is have the concept of AI as being a person in the law, and therefore they can be held accountable for their actions. But of course, that person, like a company, would have a board that would be ultimately responsible for its actions. And so in the case of airspace, we need robots that can act within the existing airspace. So not having corridors of that are quarantined, but having robots that can talk basically with manned aircraft. So we're getting plenty of comments here, which is great. So I might leave it 1 or 2 more minutes, and then we'll move on to the next page. Okay, so if people can move on to the SWOT analysis. So just zoom out and then move across, drag your cursor across over to the SWOT toes analysis. There's people putting lots of threats, but there's no text yet. So to Paul, you put that comment, there's a comment, culture resistant to change. May I suggest that might be a weakness rather than a threat? I'll move that if that's okay. one of the big threats, of course, here will be obviously the financial crisis that's going to happen, is that we won't have enough resources to provide these robotics solutions. So to everyone on the board, I'll send out a link, but we will leave these boards open for the next week. And from there, we'll then sort of collate them, move them around, and then from this, we'll use some of the ideas from this in the robotics roadmap. So one of the, in talking about the scenario of having robots that can be redeployed for emergency situations, I think the threat there is that this won't be allowed in terms of be like a civil liberty. I see the deprivation of civil liberties. That this is my robot, therefore I'm allowed to do whatever I like with it. I think, how will people feel if they have autonomous cars and that car might be coerced into assisting an emergency situation? But of course, the reality is that people more than likely won't own cars anyway, so they'll all be serviced. So the question then is, how do we incentivize the companies that are going to be offering mobility as a service? What financial incentives can we give to them to make their systems available for emergencies? You could see a situation where autonomous cars could be the cars that are driving people from the airport in response to them having COVID, rather than it being an Uber driver who may or may not then become a vector for contamination. Okay, I think we'll finish on that one. So we'll move to the technology roadmap. If people can move down left. Yep. Thanks, Ian. You can stay on the boards that you're working on. It's just that if we have a look at some of the roadmaps. So one of the challenges that we face, and probably one of the threats, is around the shortism, of investment, and that for a lot of these scenarios that we're looking in terms of disaster, such as bushfires and environmental impacts. I need to lock the screen here. Sorry, guys. When I copied it, I didn't lock it, so hold on.
Elliot, someone has asked if the board can be shared afterwards. They still can't comment or view changes.
Yeah, so I'll send out a link and I'll fix up my ownership problems. So yeah, I'll share all the links and we'll resend out to everyone the new copy. I mean, it was a very interesting conversation that we had in the defence workshop, and that was that there seems to be a crisis of imagination in this space. I think this might be true in this space as well, because people are thinking about what can a robot put out a fire in the next 3 years, but reality, we should be asking the question, what can robots do in the next 30 years? And the reality is that they probably can. We can, in 30 years is a long time in robotics. There is a high likelihood that we will be able to develop robots that can put out fires and manage fires autonomously for us. we need to have that big moonshot span of 5, 15, and 30 years. It's great. People are putting content in there. Yep. So there's somebody put in automated planning and execution of water bombing for large fires. I think the interesting challenge here is that around the existing regulation is that at the moment we're not permitted to have autonomous flights whilst there's a bushfire, but of course in the future we should be flipping that over, that probably we shouldn't allow any manned flight in a bushfire because it's too dangerous for people to fly. So we need that change in thinking about autonomy. And there is some opportunities there because, for instance, night flights. At the moment, for bushfires, people do not fly at night, but there's no reason why autonomous drones and fixed wings couldn't be flown at night to look for spot fires. Okay, any other interesting? I see there's a comment here around improving battery technology. I think the idea of whether it be batteries or whether it be hydrogen as a fuel source, but I think some really interesting work being done with fuel cells for robots, but also the idea that we can have the idea of persistent robots that are left out in the environment forever, and using renewable energy to create either charged batteries or to create hydrogen in situ so that the robots can come along and refuel or recharge and having those placed through the environment so that effectively we have refueling stations for the robots. And I see there's a comment there about the reducing the cost of robotics. I think 15 years. I think it's going to be. I think 5 years is going to be a better deadline. And I think the cost is plummeting at the moment, and the advent of autonomous cars, and particularly the NVIDIA, the compute platforms that we can now get, and the cost of those compute platforms is incredible compared to what we were looking at 10 and 20 years ago. 10 and 20 years ago, you're looking at tens of thousands of dollars to develop a compute platform on a robot that would be sufficiently robust and to power and temperature. But today you can buy that under $1,000. So I think the cost is plummeting, and the same is happening with the sensors when we sort of solid state LiDAR comes out, and of course the cost of vision, the actual compute power that's available to do machine learning for vision is quite amazing. And of course, a lot of the libraries are open source, so that reduces the cost as well. So coming up to time, so I might move on to the final one. So people have already put some things on there, which is great. This is the pest analysis. And I think for me, this is one of the probably more important in the response robotics area, because we don't have the normal stakeholders here. So if you look at mining and agriculture and construction, we know who the operators are. We know that there are companies that need it. We understand what they sell. They're selling a commodity, or they're building a building, or a manufacturing something. In this space, it's a lot more complicated. Where it's all around risk and hazards and dangers. So it's quite a different problem. I see the economics. I always put business models that support industry and innovation. Yeah, that's a hard one. People have asked me about, why aren't we building robots to, well, we are about, saving the reef or doing this. But really, the challenge for us is identifying the return on investment and how to pay for these systems. So new business models is basically what we're looking at. Somebody's put Australia's high cost for manufacturing labour. Whilst that's true, what we've found in terms of when we've been talking to around manufacturing is that that's not necessarily a biggest challenge. There's an interesting report that came out of the Manufacturing Growth Centre, the Advanced Manufacturing Growth Centre, that looked at the cost of labour across the manufacturing supply chain in terms of avionics and biomedical. They're the two areas that Australia has quite a good export industry. So we export, bits of aircraft to Boeing and so forth. When they looked at it, it is correct that for the fabrication part of the manufacturing cycle, we are about sort of 8 or 9% dearer than the OECD. So we don't compete in terms of the fabrication, and also our energy costs don't help. But manufacturing is not just fabrication, it's actually the whole, there's a thing called a smiling curve, which is from the R&D to design to the logistics and supply chain, and then the servitization at the other end. And it turns out that what we've been doing for the last 50 years with lean manufacturing is that we've optimized the hell out of fabrication. So it's very hard to complete globally at fabrication. But where the huge values are at the end, at the R&D and the servitization. That's where you get the best bang for your buck. And it turns out that Australia is 40% cheaper than the OECD in terms of the researchers like me. So researchers like me, we're underpaid, Sue. we're underpaid globally as researchers. And so Australia has a huge competitive advantage in this space, huge. And the fact that the dollar's been falling is even higher. So the challenge that we face is historically R&D and service had to be co-located with fabrication because that's the world they used to live in. But now in the digital world, and as you know, we don't need to be all physically next to each other anymore, that we can manufacture things, but we don't necessarily have to fabricate them. And so, yes, we could manufacture robots in Australia for $5, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we will be fabricating them in Australia. It could, and there are niche industries where we could do that, but generally it's not necessary. And you look at the iPhone, it's designed in California, it's manufactured in China. And who makes all the money? It all goes to the US. It doesn't go to China. So, we need to think about what part of the ecosystem Australia wants to play in this. And for us, it's not necessarily about fabricating robots, but it's about creating robots. We need to be the creators of these systems. Australia, a small market, must have global impact. Absolutely. So, as well as talking about made in Australia, people talk about buy Australian, but I'm more interested in sell Australian. And I think we should be all selling our capability globally, so that if we develop a solution for, say firefighting or say medical robotics for pandemics and stuff like that, we should be looking at the world as our marketplace, not just Australian firefighting. It should be it's a global opportunity. And we have the competitive advantage because we have to solve the problem first. So the challenge that we face with that is to make sure that the intellectual property doesn't get locked down into companies and industries that don't think globally. And that has been a challenge in the past. Anyway, I think we can probably wrap up there. Is there any other comments from the co-chairs there?
Yeah, just to say thank you for the active participation from everyone. It's great to see that engagement filling up the boards, and yeah, very happy to continue the dialogue afterwards.
Yep.
And a pleasure to work with you, Elliot, and all of my co-chairs. Thanks for the invitation, sir.
Absolutely. I second that, and excited to see that there's not a lot of duplication on the boards. Everyone seems to be bringing a really unique perspective and building on each other's understanding, which is really complementary and gives us a lot of really great insights to be able to draw from when putting the roadmap together. So thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you. Yep.
Yeah, I'll third that. I think it was fantastic to see so much interest and enthusiasm and hope and expectation about what robotics can do. So yeah, thanks to everybody that's involved.
So before we close, if anybody can put on the web chat any other last minute on the webcast, if they can put any last minute questions on there before we close. So just give people an opportunity to. No? Okay. Right. Okay. So as I said, I'll keep this Miro, the copy of this Miro board open for people, and I will send out a link to everyone on the invite as well, just in case you missed out. And I said, we'll leave this open for another week. What I'll do is I'll tidy it up because I can see that things have drifted around, and I'll sort of try and move them into different zones so it makes a little bit more sense. But with that, I think we could probably close. Is that right? Any other comments there?
Mike, Elliot.
Okay. Well, with that, I will. I'll stop my share. All right. Okay. So with that, I would say that bring this session to a close.
Are you going to stay open just for, oh, it's going to be difficult unless you want to moderate the chat?
Yeah, as I said, if people can bring up comments and all that on the Miro board, then they should be able to do that.
All right. Thanks very much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.